Last week, I made a video where I talked about the teams that work closely with or for Nintendo. I asked for people if they liked the video, well, to like the video, and let me know in the comments if they wanted me to continue that concept in future videos. Turns out they did, so here we are. If you like this video, then be sure to do the same and let me know in the comments what studios you want me to talk about next. I still have a couple more planned that are first party that you'll notice when you watch this video, so if you're wondering why didn't he talk about this studio, still have another video in the doc. And now with all of that out of the way, I'm going to talk about a studio that I touched on a little bit in the last video, but turns out we might have more information on what they may be doing. That studio is Nintendo Entertainment Research and Development, or NERD. NERD is the development team behind the emulator used in the Nintendo Classic line of consoles. Turns out they repurposed these emulators for the Nintendo Switch Online Classic library. And as many of you know, data miners have found possible evidence that 4 more console libraries are being added to the games on offer for Nintendo Switch Online subscribers, 2 of which we know share code names with the NES Classic emulator as well as the SNES Classic emulator, being Kachi Kachi and Canoe respectively. As far as the games that have been data mined so far, we're looking at some heavy hitters with Super Mario World, Super Metroid, Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past, Kirby Superstar, and F-Zero being some of the highlights. And that's only a fraction of the over 20 titles that have been uncovered. That said, what the other 2 consoles are is anyone's guess, as we never got an N64 Classic, so there's no way of knowing what the code name is, or if that was even what was next on the docket for Nintendo's Classic plans. Game Boy and or Game Boy Advance are also solid options. Also, some people are pointing out the possibility and honestly probability of the name listed as count referring to the amount of emulator types, meaning that rather than there being 2 unknown emulator types, there's 1 more unknown emulator type. The assumption from the majority seems to be that Nintendo would stick to their home consoles, but I think it's a bit unrealistic to assume that they would be offering, say, N64 and GameCube this soon, if at all, through Switch Online. So I'd bet that at most we'll get Game Boy and Game Boy Advance either separately or combined, with the final emulator type being N64. Assuming that we get those 2 emulator types. If it's just one, maybe we'll get N64. Nintendo Platform Technology Development, or Nintendo PTD, is another studio that's pretty relevant to recent gaming news, being a quote from Nintendo President Shintaro Furukawa, wherein he essentially says that Nintendo intends to continue operating as a company in the event that consoles cease to be a profitable thing for them. As I'm sure many of you know, people took this and ran with it, posing the question, what if Switch is Nintendo's last console? Well, good news for them, or maybe bad news? I don't know their life. Nintendo EPD General Manager Shinya Takahashi confirmed that Nintendo PTD is working on new hardware. Many people are speculating that means they're working on Switch revisions. This is a distinct possibility, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're also thinking about what comes after Switch as well. Hatena is another non-game dev specific studio. This time we're looking at a second party, but we're not reinventing the wheel here. This team is still located in Tokyo, and for good measure, much like Nintendo, they were also founded in Kyoto, Japan. This company specializes in web services. As far as Nintendo specifically is concerned, they were responsible for creating the hosting service for Flipnote Studio Creations, Miiverse, and most recently, they worked on the Nintendo Switch Online applet for Splatoon 2, and they are credited for, quote, functions for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which I assume is the Smash World applet that's releasing this year. I think it's safe to assume this team is the go-to team for whatever first-party Nintendo games warrant a Switch Online applet, and I'd assume the next games to prompt Nintendo to go that extra mile will likely be Animal Crossing for Switch and Pokemon Switch in 2019. And that wraps up the update for non-game dev studios. The first game dev I want to talk about in this video though is Genius Sonority. Genius Sonority is a second-party game dev partly owned by Nintendo, Pokemon Company, and its CEO Manabu Yamana. And guess what? They're located in Tokyo, Japan. This studio was originally started in 2002 with funding from former Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi's Fund for Nintendo Game Startups, and specifically had the purpose of developing console Pokemon games. GameCube games Pokemon Coliseum and XD Gale of Darkness being their handiwork. They've since broadened out a bit with the creation of the Pokemon Troze games in their most recent project, Pokemon Shuffle, but I do believe it's entirely possible that they turn their attention to another console Pokemon game. But rather than a Pokemon RPG, they work on something different. Given the fact that the gap between their last project and now certainly suggests they are working on something pretty big if past gaps in projects mean anything. They haven't released a new game in 4 years. For the entirety of their 16-year-long history, they've had almost yearly releases with the exception of their more ambitious titles, with the GameCube Pokemon games each having about 2 years separating them. I think it would behoove them to create something different but additive to the work being done by Game Freak. In a perfect world, Game Freak is putting in some serious work towards revitalizing the Pokemon franchise that would leave genius Sonority with the opportunity to preserve the current format by creating Pokemon Stadium-like games for future generations. And it wouldn't be the first time. They are also the team responsible for the Wii title Pokemon Battle Revolution, which for all intents and purposes is a Pokemon Stadium game. Equally as plausible though is they could be providing support to Game Freak for Pokemon 2019, much in the way Creatures Inc. typically does for Pokemon games, and that prospect is even more exciting because it could mean that Pokemon 2019 is a lot more ambitious than a lot of people seem to think. Founded in 2006, Grezzo is another game dev that, you guessed it, is located in Tokyo, Japan. They're pretty well known for the recent ports of Legend of Zelda games as well as the recent port for Luigi's Mansion. In addition to this, they have some original IP. One that you might have heard of is Oasis for the 3DS. They've historically been a studio that focuses their efforts on Nintendo's handhelds, but there's reason to believe they may be the ones behind the much rumored Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword Switch port. The obvious being that they've been the ones behind all but one of the Zelda ports we've seen in recent years, with EAD, now EPD, handling the Wind Waker port on Wii U. That's anecdotal evidence to be sure, but something more concrete is a call to action they posted in late 2017 stating their intent to hire staff to pursue HD development. The header for this call to action is what is the most interesting thing to me, being, quote, "Would you like to make a legend with us?" with a 2 attached, which leads me to think 2 things. 1, they're working on another Zelda game, and I believe that because they've posted a similar message in the past when they were hiring for Zelda ports. 2, it's clearly a Switch game. 3DS is very not HD. Of course, this could very well end up being a follow-up to Oasis, or maybe even a Legend of Legacy follow-up, but I doubt it. Vanpool, once again, a second-party studio founded in 1999, and at this point, do I even really have to tell you where they're located? Tokyo, Japan. Their focus has almost exclusively been handheld games, and even the few exceptions are smaller projects, with the only games they worked on completely in recent years being Dylan's Rolling Western games. At any rate, they've been on a tear of having upwards of 2-year-long gaps between releases, and I'd assume that whatever game they release next would be a Switch game, especially if that holds true. Their last game came out last year in the form of Dylan's Dead Heat Breakers. I'd bet they'll be providing support to other Switch games to get the hang of HD game development. In the meantime, after they get their footing, I'd assume their next big project will be the first home console Dylan game. HAL Laboratory is the studio with the most storied history out of all of the devs on this list, with the company dating all the way back to 1980. And just like the other devs on this list, guess what? They're located and headquartered in Tokyo, Japan. As I'm sure many of you know, HAL is the studio partially responsible for Smash Bros. Alongside Sora Limited and Bandai Namco, who we'll get to in a future video, I promise, as well as the Mother series, as well as some unique deviations like their most recent project, Part-Time UFO for iOS and Android. But perhaps above all of that, HAL is the studio behind Kirby, and that's what I think the majority of their efforts will be going toward, and ideally that'll mean we finally get a Kirby game worthy of the weight of that franchise. They've shown glimpses of a desire to create a 3D Kirby game with experiments like Kirby's Air Ride, or the spoilers for Star Allies, I guess, skip ahead like 10 seconds, ending for Kirby Star Allies. If this means what I hope it means, we may not see a Kirby game for longer than usual. We recently got word that HAL wrapped wrapped up production on Star Allies post-release content. While announcing this, Star Allies director Shinya Kumazaki said, quote, "In order to bring the Kirby series to its next phase, we created a game that celebrates the 25 years of history that brought us to this point," unquote. This specific piece of his statement leads me to think HAL aims to take Kirby in a new direction. Hopefully, this is the time for them to bring Kirby games to the level of Mario and Zelda games. Those are my thoughts and a bit of Nintendo studio knowledge. What did you think? Are there any studios you want to know more about? Specifically third party with a heavy Nintendo focus? Like, I don't know, Bandai Namco? Let me know that in the comments down below. And for the comment challenge, I just want to know, what are you guys all playing? I'm currently playing through a combo of Super Smash Bros. Because I have a problem, as previously stated, and New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. Hashtag free product provided by Nintendo. Also, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, as previously stated, clicking the like button goes a long way, and sharing it with a friend goes even further. A friend who also just wants to know more about the studios making the games they're playing. Consider becoming a channel member for loyalty badges, exclusive emotes, gaming time with us, free Switch keys from time to time, and priority when we stream games like Super Smash Bros. Every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, we're going to be streaming Smash Bros. With Bob from the Wolf Den on twitch.tv/fanatixfour. We're going to be co-streaming. It's going to be a great time. And easily above all of that, what you can do to help the channel out is subscribe and ring the bell for more videos like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We also have a podcast that's on a different channel, linked in the description. That's Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, that's it for me. See you next week.